Hello and welcome to this video about editing photos in Lightroom. Specifically, what we're going to edit today are portraits, and using the various tools in Lightroom, both selective and general, to make portraits look better. Here's my general and quick philosophy about editing portraits in any program, but especially in Lightroom. I try and keep a gentle hand, not do too much. I don't want people to look fake. I want it to feel natural and pretty much how they look when you're talking to them. So they look like a real person, they look like them, you don't. So I'll remove some blemishes and maybe reduce wrinkles, whiten teeth a little bit, brighten eyes, because that's how a person looks and feels when you're actually talking to them. When you're staring at a portrait on a screen or a piece of paper, it's two-dimensional, it's flat, it doesn't have that human interaction. So I want to add some of that human element back in the software. Fix the little things that we don't really notice, but they stand out in photos, some stuff like that. Also compensate for obviously lighting issues, and just environmental stuff as well. So we're going to go through a sequence of photos from some simple headshots, a couple weddings, and walk you through some of the steps I take in editing photos in Lightroom. So let's jump in. We'll start first here with this headshot. Nice simple background and nothing fancy here as far as posing, lighting, or anything. It's two lights. This one will be pretty straightforward. What I'm going to do first is what I do first when I look at a portrait is what do I see that maybe needs addressing. So first of all, the color's a little blue. The background light looks a little blue. I left my camera on automatic white balance, and with the flash it's going to make the white background look a little blue, which means his skin tones are also going to be a little blue. So I'm going to adjust that. Secondly, he's got some small blemishes on his face, so we'll address those. Maybe brighten up his eyes just a teeny tiny bit, because eyes are the first things we see in photos, and the things we concentrate on the most. So that's our strategy. Here we go. So I'm in the develop module. In the basic panel, I'm going to do most of the work here in the basic panel. So first stop, let's get the white balance correct. The fast way, and the way I'll do it when I'm on a white background like this, I'll just grab this eyedropper tool and find a spot in the background that looks approximately gray, click it once, and you'll notice it moved the white balance. So it's a little more a yellow now, a little warmer tone, which I like quite a bit on faces. People, especially when they're smiling, the warmer color goes with the smile. So I'm going to leave exposure and contrast alone, go down here to highlights, shadows, whites, and blacks. Generally on portraits, I'll open the shadows a little bit. One of the things that'll do is hide wrinkles a little bit, makes faces look a little smoother. In this portrait, I'm going to leave the whites and shadows and highlights, and the blacks alone. In the presence section, while I love using this stuff on landscapes and nature and texture things, I usually leave these alone on portraits because I tend to turn them up. And they're most of the time not too flattering on skin tones. Maybe texture just a little bit, but not too much. Vibrance and saturation down here, I'm just going to nudge vibrance up just a little bit to give a little extra color, and then saturation, I'll just leave that alone. Usually, depending again on skin tone and where I'm at, on the temperature, I'll take that maybe a little towards, farther towards yellow, towards the warm tones, and the tint I want to keep towards the reds, the mid pinks, rather than the greens. So I'm pretty well set there. What I'm going to do now is zoom in. That's the Command on a Mac, Control on a PC, and then hit the plus sign. I'll do it one more time, and then I will click, hold, drag, and with the grabber hand, and you can see we're going to address just a little bit some blemishes here. Again, one of the philosophies I've heard and I like about addressing blemishes, if it's going to be gone in 2 weeks, go ahead and take it out of the photo. So I agree with that. you can do as you would like. So I'm going to use the spot removal tool here, and that's the second tool from the left in the toolbar. We're going to, and if you'd like to learn more about the spot removal tool in depth, there's a video for that in the Map to Lightroom series. So I'll go quickly through it. My size will depend on the spot I'm trying to cover. The feather, softness of the edge, I usually leave that around 50. And for this, I'm going to leave the opacity at 100. My mode is in heal. So, I'll start at the top-ish of the head, work my way down. Got a little blemish right there. Click once, see if it grabs a good spot. I'll usually move it to a spot that's same texture and brightness. Working down, let's see what else we got. A little bit here on his lip. We'll go a little smaller on that. Grab from, again, same general area to kind of hide it a little bit more. Got another one here. So we'll kind of go quickly through these, hopefully. You do have to be careful when using the spot removal that the sample area it grabs isn't a worse spot, so that it makes it less even effective. So we'll go here. So we'll go quickly through here. Bump, bump, bump. That's pretty good. Pretty good. I'm going to scroll down. When you're in one of the selective adjustment tools and you want to scroll, move around the image, you hold down the space bar and that will let you drag left, right, up, down. So I'm going to go down here on his neck. We've got a little bit of red there. We'll go over here to smooth that out a little bit. Maybe a little bit right there as well. Again, move that around a little bit just to keep it nice and smooth. So zoom back out just a little bit. I'm going to come back up to his eyes. Now, what I want to do just a little bit, I just want to brighten his eyes a little bit, not a lot. Oops, didn't mean to do that. Command Z to undo. So a couple ways I can go here. I'm just going to go relatively quickly. I tend to edit relatively quickly in portraits even, just because... because I don't do fine portraiture. I do nice portraiture, but not fine portraiture. Anyway, so once I'm in, so I'm going to use now the radial adjustment tool, the radial filter it's called. It's the second from the right. It's the circle with the dot in the middle. You can see there's some controls already applied. What I do every time I come into the selective tools, I'm just in the habit of clicking twice on the word effect to reset everything. I want to brighten his eyes just a little bit. So I'm going to start with an exposure of about 0.5. That might be too much. Radial adjustment, also another tutorial is available on that. Completely just a dedicated tutorial to the radial filter in the Map to Lightroom. So I'm just going to drag this from the middle, kind of rotate to match his eye shape, and move that over just a little bit. I need to zoom in a little bit more. And we'll do the same. Well, I'm going to leave that one alone for just a minute. So you can see that brightens his eyes. You don't want to go crazy on this, obviously, because it's going to start to look fake. And when you're zoomed in, it's a little hard to tell how much is enough and how much is too much. So sometimes I'll zoom in and out just to see. But you want to be pretty subtle with this stuff so it doesn't look fake. So a little bit added exposure. I'll probably take the shadows a little bit as well. Again, it's pretty quick to go fake. So keep it kind of subtle. This will just pop his irises a little bit. Do another one on this eye over here. By default, this tool will make each time you click and drag, it will create a new filter, a new radial filter. So this one just has the exposure adjustment, and I need to throw in just a little bit of the shadow to match. So I'm going to back up, Command minus, and see how we did. And that looks good. So here's the before. Here's the after. Before, after. Now, yeah, I need to go back into his eyes. I'm not happy. It's too much shadow. So I'm going to take the shadow out of both of those and drop the exposure just so it's just nudging it up about 0.1 to 0.5. So I need to do that on both of them. Let's go to back here, 0.15, take the shadows out, click done to commit that back up just a little bit. Gonna brighten the whole thing just a bit. Pull the blacks down just a little bit, keep his shirt dark. Oh, there is a spot on his shirt I'm seeing now, so I'm gonna go back to spot removal. Take care of that, a little spot there, a little spot there. All right, so we're looking pretty good here on his shirt. One more thing I want to do, I do want to darken his shirt just a little bit. There's a couple ways to go with this. I'm going to just use an adjustment brush, which lets me paint where I want, and I'm going to reset that to 0. I'm going to darken his shirt just a little bit, and I'm just going to paint, and his shirt will get darker. It's relatively easy to do this with a white background because you don't have to be, well, you got to be a little careful, but you don't have to be super duper careful. You do want to avoid his skin. And I'm going to lighten this up in a minute, but I'm just with this dark so I could see what I was doing. Quickly. I know this is taking a little bit longer than I said I might on this photo, but it's still faster than most editing techniques, and it still goes relatively quickly. I'll drop the blacks as well on that adjustment brush. I've got a little bit of spill over here, so I'm going to hold down the Option key on a Mac, Control on a PC, Alt, I guess, on a PC, and just erase a little bit where that brush was hitting where I don't want it outside in the white, and that's without the adjustment brush. So his shirt's a little bright, it pops too much. Now it's a darker shirt, so you really see his face. Lots of ways to paint with contrast. I could brighten his face or I can darken his shirt. So his face is the good brightness, so I wanted to darken his shirt just a little bit more. All right, second one, we'll move over here to a headshot outside in an environment. Looking at this image, what I want to adjust is mainly her face is too dark. She's in shadow, which is a nice pleasing light, but it's not quite enough of it for this exposure. I didn't want to overexpose the background, so I knew I could do some of these things on her face later in Lightroom, so that's what we're going to do. And I'm also going to address her eyes are a little dark. I'm going to brighten those up a little bit. Specifically when we were taking photos, she's got a little scar on her forehead she asked me to remove. And then later, as I got home, I noticed she has the brightest teeth I've ever seen. And they're actually, I haven't adjusted those. So I'm actually going to tone those down just a teeny tiny bit. So first, to brighten her face, I'm going to use the radial filter. Double click effect to reset, and I know I want to brighten her face a little bit, so I'm going to create a spotlight basically on her face. So I'll just start about 1.0 on the plus side, click, hold, drag, and then I'm going to tilt this a little bit. It's too bright right now, but it gives me the ballpark. If when you draw the adjustment, a graduated filter, and this is the radial filter. When you draw a radial filter and you expect it to get darker, but it's getting outside the filter area, the circle you drew, make sure your invert down here underneath the feather control is checked. And when you invert, it will change inside the shape you drew. A little too bright there on exposure, so I'm going to drop that down. Take my shadows and brighten those up a little bit. Not too much, but just enough. And I think the face looks, we're pretty good there. If you need to rotate like I did for her tilted head, you take the cursor outside the shape you drew, and you can just click, hold, and rotate that guy. All right, I'm going to zoom in a little bit and do two things. I have a tool selected. I'm going to do three things. I'm going to hold down the command key, space bar, and I'm going to get rid of this scar using the spot removal tool. A brush that's just, I got a relatively small working area here, so I want to use a not too big brush. Just going to click, hold, drag, and the auto selection did a pretty good job. Again, my feather softness of the brush is at 48, and the opacity, how much it's replacing, is at 100. So it completely replaces what was there. Secondly, I'm going to come down to her teeth and just actually darken those a little bit. That's pretty uncommon. Most people need a little whitening and brightening of their teeth. So for that, I'm going to switch to the adjustment brush. Again, double click the word effect. And this time I'm going to turn exposure just a little bit negative and just brush on her teeth, where her whites of her teeth are. It's very subtle. I'm just doing a little bit. I don't want them to look gray. That would be bad. So just a little darker there. I'm going to turn the tool off briefly so you can see. So bright, a little darker. I want her eyes to be the thing to pop, not her teeth. As I mentioned, I want to see her eyes. So I'm going to brighten up her eyes a little bit behind her glasses here. So I've already created one adjustment brush, so I need a new one. So I'm going to click New. Double click effect to reset everything, and then I'm going to increase my exposure a little bit. I usually go to about 0.4 or 5 just so I can see what I'm doing as I'm brushing. I'm going to zoom in a little more, Command plus to do that, and I'm just going to paint on the whites of her eyes here just a little bit. I could get rid of these veins, and I might come back and do that with the spot removal, but for now we'll just start here. So that's the whites of her eyes. I did both the in and out of the whites of her eyes on both with one brush. Both eyes, one brush. So I'm going to make, that's probably a little too bright. In fact, I know it is. So generally for whites of the eyes, I keep the exposure, if I increase it, to somewhere between 0.1 and 0.3. How much, I just zoom out because you don't want it to look zombie eyes or weird eyes. So zooming out helps you see that. All right, so I want to do another new brush because I want to do her pupils now. Double click effect again. What I want to do here, I am going to brighten her pupils a little bit. You can go a little more on the brightness on pupils usually. And usually what I'll add on pupils as well is a little texture and clarity and sometimes dehaze just to pop them a little bit. Go a little bigger, just click, hold, and brush here. There we go. It's subtle, but it helps. It's subtle, but it helps. And then I'm going to put the mouse over this side so I can see where I brushed to make sure I didn't really miss anything. When you do a pause, a hover with your mouse over the pin that Lightroom created where you first started brushing with that brush, you will see red or pink overlay where you brushed. So there we go. Let's zoom back out. Let's make sure we're not too crazy in the amount. I might turn the exposure again down just a little bit. Click done. Yeah, so we're in good shape, I think. Let's do a before and after. There's before. Oh, that's sorry, that's only before all the way back to the previous version. So let me show you in the history panel where we started here. Where's my history? Oops, I went too far. Here we go. So this is where we started today. No, this is where we started today. Here's where we are now. There we go. I might warm this whole thing up a little bit. I had forgotten I had done that. So I'm just going to add a little bit of white balance. I make it feel less like a cloudier day to a little bit warmer. There we go. Again, here's where we were, especially on her face. Really lots of change. So pretty subtle, done in about 10-15 minutes, maybe a little bit less. And it's super easy to do all this in Lightroom. Let's go to another example here. Again, I'm going to do similar tools. A graduated radial filter on her face, brighten her face a little bit, brighten her eyes just a bit, and whiten her teeth just a little bit this time. But first, we'll start off on the overall photo. We'll come to temperature and just warm that up a little bit. And that's good there. I'll maybe do a little bit of shadow brightening, just a little extra exposure. and throw a little vibrance in, a little extra saturation, just a nudge, and that's a pretty good place to start on the overall photo. All right, so I'm gonna zoom in a little bit, and then I'm gonna zoom back out. Sorry, I need this, and we'll start on her face with a radial filter. Double click effect to get started. Click, hold, drag, center that up on her. I forgot to give a little something to have happen. So we're going to brighten her face just a little bit, just a little spotlight on her face, about 0.3 to 0.4. Open the shadows a little bit, somewhere between 7 and 10. Now adjust this and reshape it a little bit. There we go. Now I'm going to zoom in and do adjustment brush on the eyes. I gotta go a little more. Adjustment brush on the eyes, and that'll be a little extra exposure and a little less shadow. So adjustment brush on the eyes. I don't know why I start on the right eye usually. That's kind of weird. Anyway, right eye, left eye. And something I've noticed in this image, the whites of her eyes are a little blue. So sometimes when you gotta, and her teeth will do this too, her teeth are gonna be a little yellow. Yay, coffee and tea. It's a little hard with white balance to get that just right. So what I'll often do is just drop the saturation in that adjustment brush, and that'll take the color out. I don't want it to be gray like this is right now, but just nudge some of the color out. So somewhere usually between -30 and -50 will help with that. Well, next I want to do the pupils on her eye, a new brush here, and I'm gonna, oops, I forgot to double click effect. What I want to do here is a little brightening, add some contrast, pull the blacks down a little bit, add some texture, some clarity, and dehaze. And I might adjust this all later. So this just brings some pop and sharpness to the pupil in a very, very fast way. It's a little much on the texture and the dehaze here. You got to keep it subtle, maybe even with the contrast. So you do want to keep it subtle. Zoom back out a little bit just to see. That's better. The whites of her eyes are too much now. 0.35 is too much, so I'll probably go back down to about 0.115. There we go, that's better. Zoom back in, see how we're dancing with the image. All right, holding down spacebar, scrolling down to her teeth. I'm gonna make a new brush, adjustment brush. Double click effect to get started. And what I wanna do is brighten her teeth just a little bit, pull the saturation down to get rid of the thing we all have, most of us anyway, the lack of perfectly white Hollywood teeth. We're real human beings. You don't notice it when you're talking to someone, but you do when you're looking at their portrait. So just a quick brush through. It's not gone. I don't erase the imperfection. I just try to minimize it being the first thing you see when you look at a portrait. So that's her teeth. I'm going to turn off all the adjustment brushes so you can see what we did. There's off. So her teeth get a little brighter, her eyes get a little brighter. We also did the radial filter. So here's, let's see, here's where we started in this. Here is overall start. Here's overall end. Let me click done here so you can see the eyes and the face and everything else we did. So you can see we're moving faster before and after. It's pretty subtle, but it makes a big difference. You add all these little layers up and it looks more like when you're actually talking here to Carrie. All right, next we got a wedding. Very little here because it's not a close portrait, but I am going to do one little thing. Just like I'm going to add a little graduated filter around her face, brighten her face a little bit after we get done dealing with some other stuff in here. So we're going to start with the basic panel, go to exposure. I'll probably just brighten it a little bit, pull the shadows forward a little bit. The dress, always a challenge. I'm going to pull my whites down a little bit and my highlights. There we go. Bring the details back. It does darken her face, which again is why I want to have to add that graduated filter. Now, we're going to basically actually not be retouching the portrait so much as the environment. We got this big ugly twig here, and then all this not green grass. So we're going to make this grass green after I start again with a graduated filter on her, not graduated, radial filter on Natalie's face here. So I'm going to double click effect to get started. Just drop a graduated filter on there, get it shaped to her head, match the angle, make it a little bigger, and add a little exposure in there. Again, don't go crazy. People will notice. Keep it subtle. I do about usually somewhere between 1/4 and 1/2 a stop on the plus. And then again, a lot of the work I can do in the shadows. If you do take your shadows a little bit higher, again, that's going to be a little more pleasing on most faces. So just a little larger there. There we go. So we'll click done on that. Feeling good. I want to get rid of this yuckiness here. I'm going to use spot removal for that. The distraction removal tool. The reason you see this is because it's different. It's contrast to all these other kind of patterns of regular shapes. So I'm going to click, hold, drag, and brush, brush, brush. And let's see where it's going to grab. That works, but it's too repetitious. So I'm going to go all the way over here where the pattern is not hopefully connected and see if I can nudge that around. There we go. I love that tool. All right, so got rid of the ugly thing there. And then next what I've got to do is brush this grass back to green. So I'm going to use the adjustment brush and double click effect to get it back to 0. So here's what I'm going to do to change the color here. I'm going to click on this color box plus the, and then I'm going to click on this white rectangle with the X through it. And I'm going to grab a color just to get me started. And I'm going to go start with a big brush and see how we're doing. And it's, why isn't it doing anything? Oh, there we go. It just took a minute. Now, obviously that's wrong. That's the wrong color. So what I'm going to do here is click again, and with some of it already painted now, let me get a little more painted, sorry. So I can see with that brush. So I'm going to click that again and try and find a green that matches better. I'm going to end up having to paint this whole thing. I'm not going to do the whole deal here in the video. I'm going to grab it from my previous example, but you can see what you do is you just, at least my strategy for painting with a brush like this is I go around in the large areas quickly with a large brush and paint in until I get close to the areas I need to slow down, which is a detail of her dress. So that's kind of a quick version of how to do it. Actually, you can even get up there in the beauty bark area, add a little green in there. But basically what we're doing is we're just getting rid of that ugly green grass. I might drop the exposure a little bit, add that layer of change in as well. I don't want you to see the grass, I want you to see her. And you'll probably have to back and forth a little bit on the color here to get it just right. Yeah. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to do some magic here and copy it from my original photo and paste it back in here and show you the final result. So hang on a second. All right, through the magic of television, here we are with the grass edited, graduated filter, stick removed. So sometimes in portrait editing, what you need to edit and be aware of to edit is the environment. Last but not least, we're going to throw in almost everything in the toolbox on this image of Nicole and Steven at their wedding, starting with a whole bunch of things in the basic panel. So here we go. So in the basic panel, as always, start with the temperature, go a little warmer. And then diagnosing the photo, what I've got is his face is in shadow. Distraction here. Up in this corner of the left corner of the image, we've got some color. It's bright and it's a little bit bluer. Down here we've got a patch of brown, got a little patch here. There's just a lot of distractions. Speaking of distractions, up here at the top, we've got some little branches. So distraction removal, exposure changes, color changes to help focus your eye on these two lovely folks. So we're going to do that. Let's see. We'll start with spot removal. That's often what I'll do first, so I can actually concentrate on what I'm doing. So I'll get rid of these guys up here. Not a good sample, so we'll go to a different sample. Go over here to this guy. That's a decent sample. Watch out for repeating patterns like I had there. That'll work. Blurry stuff is easy to fix because it's just texture and non-repeating patterns, so no one's going to look for seams as much. So down here, there's that little, and I'm going to get rid of that. We'll also get rid of that white thing here. It's like probably just a leaf, but why? If you're going to look at it, it's not good, so I want to get rid of it. Right up here, I've got some extra. I'm going to just brush out this little bit of beauty bark with the little brighter area. Use this other area to kind of fill that and hide it. Over here, I've got these little offshoots coming here, plus this change in color. So again, spot removal tool to the rescue. Got to be a little careful as I approach her hand. I don't want to touch that. So let's do that. Let go. See where it's going to sample. That's not good. You need kind of matching textures, or at least kind of closer. That's pretty good. This tool is so cool. So that's better. Turn it off. Look at that. Getting rid of distractions. So exposure. His face is a little dark. So I'm going to see if I can fix that with the graduated. I keep calling it the graduated. It's the radial filter. Oops, I still have the color on, so let's reset that. Come up here. Got to reshape it to match Steven's head a little more. There we go. Let's go to shadows. Let's go to exposure. Hey, there's Steven. There we go. That part of his face I need to see a little bit more. Up here, top left corner, too bright. So now I'm going to use the graduated filter. I'm going to click, hold, drag. Again, I forgot to double click effect. You can see what happens. It retained some from the last setting. I'm going to drag that darker. Bring this in a little bit. It's a little different. It's a little more yellowy. So I'm going to. It's a different color, I should say. So I'm going to move it towards the yellows just a little bit, and a little more towards green. It's got a fair bit of blue in there. So I'm using the temperature and the tint slider to get us in there. There we go. So lots of stuff in the selective adjustment tools. I think I'm done there. Let's go down to the basic panel now. Brighten the whole image up just a little bit. Bring out that happy feeling. Let's see what I want to do. Little shadows to the brighter. Little vibrance, not too much. And I think we're in pretty decent shape on that. So come back here. That's where we started. And then boom, there we go. So went really quickly through that. Feel free to play it back at slower speeds. But you can see how powerful the editing tools in Lightroom are for portraits. 5-10 minutes of photo on most cases, and they look really, really good. Obviously, this isn't the same as retouching for a glamour magazine or the cover of a magazine on a newsstand, but for 90+% of what most of us do, Lightroom has the tools you need to make people look like they do in their portraits, like they do when you're talking to them. Make them look real, make them look authentic, make them look like they do in real life. So that's my goal. I hope this was helpful. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments below. There are several videos in this series in Lightroom that will help you with some of the specifics that I went through quickly, some of the individual tools. There's a separate video for each of those, so feel free to watch those as well. So I hope this was helpful and you found it useful in your photos of folks and people you know, so they look their best and look like you do when you're talking to them in real life. So have fun taking photos, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. Bye.